Machiavelli stressed two sets of attributes for the prince. One was very colorful. He used the image of the fox and the lion. A prince must have the ability of the fox to find the snare and the courage of the lion to drive off the wolves.
At certain particular moments, which he calls the founding or refounding of a regime, you will need a leader with exceptional intelligence, with the intelligence of a Lincoln, with the intelligence of a Washington, with the intelligence of a Bonaparte.
Machiavelli's breakthrough is that he gives us the persona, the personality of the political realist. He gives us the inner discipline of the strategist. And this is a discipline that involves a great deal of self-control, such that one cannot revel in conquest, one can not strike out impulsively, one has to be constantly scrutinizing one's own motives, one must constantly tend to others carefully, even civilly, lest you give away your own hand, and while you're trying to discern their own missteps or their own deceptions. And so what we get is someone who's not quite a Christian knight, but is nonetheless often very well behaved.
He also gives us the political actor. The prince may or may not keep his word, may or may not be humane, devout, a man's man, a family man, depending on the circumstances. But he must appear to be all of those things.
Men in general judge by their eyes rather than by their hands, because everyone is in a position to watch. Few are in a position to come in close touch with you. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are.
And so there is a larger sense in which the prince is playing a role, which is to appear to be the things he knows he must not necessarily be, and to appear to act on principle when what he's acting on is calculation, or what the modern world would refer to as long-term strategy, because in a certain way Machiavelli invented the very notion of a long-term strategy.
Stay focused. Talk about things that matter to people. You know? It's the economy, stupid. Okay?
So, as we always say, you know, speed kills. And we will die in this debate if we're not there first with our answers.
Bush was on the defensive.
But perhaps most important, Machiavelli's prince is a political artist.
He sees the prince as somebody who takes matter as though it were marble and imposes a form on it as though that person were a sculptor.
Form out of stone, order out of chaos, civilization from savagery. Michelangelo and Machiavelli's prince have much in common. Trouble is, raw material for the prince is human flesh and blood. For that, the prince must learn how and when to be cruel. And he must have studied war.
The main foundations of every state are good laws and good arms. And because you cannot have good laws without good arms, and where there are good arms, good laws inevitably follow, I shall not discuss laws, but give my attention to arms.
The sentence is one of the most marvelous puzzles in all of Machiavelli. You need good arms. Good arms are the arms of a citizen army, not a mercenary army. How do you get the citizens to serve in the army? They have to think that the society meets their own private self-interest. So you need to have a republic in order to have a citizen army. You need to have good laws to have a republic.
You are bound to meet misfortune if you are unarmed, because, among other reasons, people despise you. And this is one of the infamies a prince should be on his guard against. There is simply no comparison between a man who is armed and one who is not.
Well, he's right on the money there. Machiavelli, I think, is most useful, in my judgment, when you're thinking about international relations rather than the government within a state or a city. International relations are different from internal matters, for one reason, because there is no law between nations. In reality, you really do have a jungle out there. And that's different from states, where you do have a law which has legitimacy and which monopolizes force in the hands of the government. Well, the world out there isn't like that. And we in the world today, in the West, in the United States, we hate that idea. It makes us very unhappy and very uncomfortable, and we refuse to believe it much of the time. And so this is where Machiavelli is most valuable, in reminding us of those gross realities which haven't changed. You've got to have that power.
No government should ever imagine that it can always adopt a safe course. This is the way things are. Whenever one tries to escape one danger, one runs into another. Prudence consists in being able to assess the nature of a particular threat and in accepting the lesser evil.
Making careful judgments, that's prudence, as Machiavelli says, and that's what we hire our government for.
So in the end, Machiavelli also says that you shouldn't be over-cautious. You shouldn't be too prudent in that sense. You're going to have to take action.
It's easy to think of a very immediate example of that in the case of Bosnia, where Bush, whom I think had the best chance of dealing with the problem and settling it, had from the beginning been willing to look at the reality, which is that we are not free to allow that sort of violence, that sort of, what's the word I want to, the breaking of international order to happen in the middle of Europe.
And I think we had a lot more leverage on our NATO allies in Europe than we were, for whatever reason, we were willing to exercise. And there was probably a failure of leadership on our part.
There's no law of nature that says the United States has to be involved in every crisis. At the time we made the final decision, we probably had no alternative. But on the road to the final decision, we certainly did not apply Machiavelli's maxims. We never asked ourselves, what is our objective here? What is our interest here? What are the means available? What is the best thing that can happen? What is the worst thing that can happen?
Has an American president ever applied that kind of analysis before committing the nation to some foreign involvement?
I think Roosevelt did it in his own mind before he went into World War II. Roosevelt had the capability of doing it. Nixon had a great capacity for that.
Henry Kissinger has been called the American Machiavelli by admirers as well as critics. That would make Richard Nixon his prince. Especially talented in foreign policy, often brilliant, incisive, but secretive and suspicious. Richard could have profited from Niccolò's advice on at least one score.
A prince must watch that he does not become afraid of his own shadow. His behavior must be tempered by humanity and prudence, so that excessive distrust does not make him unbearable.
For more than a century, Americans enjoyed the advantage of isolation amid rich natural resources. They were the exception among nations, immune from Europe's Machiavellian virus, the politics of survival. Is that immunity gone now?
We cannot afford the pure American exceptional approach indefinitely. Doesn't mean that every end justifies every means, but it means that the purity that we have tended to, with some of our academics and some of our leaders have insisted on, will be much more difficult.
We destabilized governments. We tried to assassinate foreign leaders. We did some things, I think, again, particularly in singling out the Nixon administration, that were a violation of our principles, our ideals. I think we're suffering for that today.
In the first 100 days, we will bring to the vote...
While Machiavelli's real expertise seems to be foreign policy, some of his advice on domestic affairs also has resonance, at least for modern-day conservatives.
A man should not be afraid of improving his possessions lest they be taken away from him, or another deterred by high taxes from starting a new business. But above all, a prince must avoid taking the property of others, because men sooner forget the death of their father than the loss of their inheritance.
Seventh, require a 3/5 majority vote to pass a tax increase.
On the other hand, his ideal prince does bear a resemblance to Lenin. Kill the old prince and his family, create new titles and powers, and give them to new men.
He should make the poor rich and the rich poor, as David did when he became king.
Machiavelli's advice seems so often to cut 2 or more ways. It is little wonder there is a score of differing interpretations of The Prince. Take, for instance, the bit about fear and love.
It is far better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both, but you must avoid being hated.
Fear is useful. Hatred is counterproductive. Most corporate executives would agree with that. Strict adherence to Christian virtue is just out of place.